Amazon just greenlit a prequel show starring a literal Nazi, the same showrunner who spent years in press interviews explicitly telling audiences never to sympathize with her, never to humanize her. By the end of this video, I want you to be able to answer one question. Is The Boys still a satire, or has it become the thing it makes fun of? Because that question gets more uncomfortable the closer you look. The Boys launched in 2019 as the best satirical critique of the superhero industry, and it may now be the most vivid illustration of its own argument. From tone-deaf writing decisions and a showrunner going to war with his own fanbase, to massive casting controversies and the horrific online harassment of its own cast members, the story behind the camera is genuinely disturbing. And the worst of it, the thing that completely exposes what this franchise has actually become, is still coming. And the most damning place to start is the exact business strategy The Boys spent 2 seasons mocking, because Amazon is now running it. When Eric Kripke and his writing team launched the series, their stance was clear. They were actively pushing back against the modern cinematic universe model. The early seasons spent a lot of time pointing at the flaws of the executives who control major superhero franchises from behind the scenes. The goal was to highlight how corporate interest and quarterly profits routinely override actual artistic integrity. The writing often took direct shots at the concept of endless sequels, prequel spin-offs, and manufactured cinematic phases. They specifically targeted the exhausting industry trend that forces audiences to consume hours of supplementary television just to understand a single movie's plot. The VOD Cinematic Universe, or the VCU, was designed as a direct pointed parody of Kevin Feige's Marvel Empire and the DC Extended Universe. We saw this heavily featured in storylines involving the troubled production of the Dawn of the Seven movie, the corporate launch of the VOD Plus streaming service, and the constant scenes where characters relied on focus groups and algorithms to decide their next narrative arc. But as time went on, the situation became noticeably ironic. The show that built a large part of its early reputation on mocking the concept of a cinematic universe has steadily transitioned into utilizing the exact same model. Amazon and the creative team haven't just stuck to a single TV show. They've built a franchise with multiple branches. Obviously, we have the original Boys show. Then they released The Boys Presents Diabolical, an animated anthology series designed to keep audience retention high between standard seasons. Then came Gen V, a live-action collegiate spin-off, and this one is particularly notable because it wasn't just a standalone side story. It introduced the soup-killing virus, and major character shifts that became required viewing to fully understand the plot developments of the main show's 4th and 5th seasons. Following Gen V, Amazon announced The Boys Mexico, expanding the franchise into international markets with Diego Luna and Gail Garcia Bernal, and most recently, the greenlit Vault Rising, a live-action prequel set in the 1950s. Now, it creates a noticeable disconnect when a series dedicates hours of television to making fun of major studios for bleeding their intellectual property dry with endless streaming spin-offs, only to turn around and launch 4 different spin-off shows of its own under the Amazon banner. The satire loses its edge. When The Boys makes a joke about Vought forcing audiences to watch a spin-off to understand the main team, that joke loses value when Amazon essentially requires you to watch Gen V just to understand why Homelander is acting different in Season 4. Vought is starting to become an accurate reflection of how Amazon Studios is managing its most profitable property. And if that's true of the content strategy, what about the money? Because what Amazon has been quietly doing with the production budget on their most successful show is something that would make Stan Edgar proud. The Boys is arguably Prime Video's most successful and culturally relevant original series. For 5 years, it has been the undeniable crown jewel of their streaming platform. Aside from Invincible, it's easily the most popular superhero show. And you would logically assume that as the show moved towards its highly anticipated final seasons, the production budget would naturally expand to match the epic scales of the narrative. But if you look closely at the visual fidelity of the later seasons, the opposite appears to have happened. Audiences began to notice a distinct shift in the show's visual presentation. The lived-in world of the early seasons slowly faded. Back in Season 1, the universe felt tangible. The streets were filled with extras. The environment felt like real locations. And there was a constant underlying sense of scale to the superhero action. Early on, we saw impressive practical effects. Queen Maeve stopping a speeding truck with her bare hands. But by the time we reach the later seasons, the production relies heavily on enclosed, dimly lit rooms and static sets. Fans pointed out the changes to the color grading, noting that the show transitioned from a dynamic, cinematic look to flatter, muted grays and blacks that made the framing feel cheaper. Instead of massive set pieces, scenes featuring powerful characters like Homelander and Butcher were increasingly reduced to simple dialogue exchanges in smoky rooms or empty hallways. So why did Amazon's flagship show suddenly look like it's struggling to maintain its visual standard? Over the last few years, Amazon executed the largest corporate layoff in the company's 3-decade history. CEO Andy Jassy initiated a multi-phase workforce reduction that ultimately eliminated around 30,000 corporate jobs. This downsizing affected divisions across the entire company, including AWS, Human Resources, and critically, Prime Video. Jassy publicly emphasized a need to eliminate organizational bloat and cut excess bureaucracy, pushing for a much leaner corporate structure, and the push for cost efficiency bled directly into their entertainment budgets. Now, this isn't necessarily a new strategy for the tech giant. Anyone familiar with Amazon's production history knows that they have a pattern of pulling back the budgets on their most popular shows as they approach the finish line. We saw similar financial tightening with The Man in the High Castle, The Expanse, and Jack Ryan. Even showrunner Eric Kripke has been forced to publicly address these financial constraints. When discussing the final stretch of the series, Kripke admitted that they simply don't have a massive Game of Thrones level budget. He warned fans not to expect sprawling citywide battle scenes, noting that the show has to rely on more contained, direct character confrontations instead. The visual constraints of the later seasons are a direct result of this corporate strategy. Amazon recognized that the audience was already hooked and committed to seeing the story through. So rather than investing maximum capital to ensure a visually spectacular finale, they tightened the budget to maximize the return on investment on its way out. And the same corporate logic that drove the budget decisions has also shaped how Amazon has handled the people making the show. Because the story of Gen V and what happened to its cast after it was cancelled illustrates the exact same pattern, just with human consequences this time. Gen V was originally introduced as a strategic expansion of the franchise's universe, focusing on a younger generation of superheroes attending Godolkin University. It was designed to bridge the narrative gap between the main season of The Boys while maintaining audience engagement on the Prime Video platform. Initially, the series was well received. It earned praise for introducing a fresh cast and using the superhero framework to address complex real-world social issues. However, production faced a significant and unexpected setback when Chance Perdomo, one of the lead actors of the series, passed away in March 2024. The loss of Perdomo was a profound blow to the cast, the crew, and the viewership, but rather than restructuring the narrative to right around the loss and continue the story to honor the actor's legacy across future seasons, the studio ultimately took a different route. In April 2026, after season 2 finished, the executive producers confirmed that Amazon Prime Video was officially canceling Gen V. Jazz Sinclair, played the lead character Marie Moreau, released a message on social media reacting to the news. She noted that she couldn't possibly sum up the 5 years of challenges, loss, and friendship in a single post, but expressed profound gratitude for the role. She wrote, "I'm truly honored to have gotten to be your Marie. She's fierce and flawed and powerful as hell. And as a woman, particularly a woman of color, it brings me so much pride to have gotten to embody such a multifaceted and badass character." She also described the grueling 5-round audition process she went through back in 2021, expressing how rare it is to find a role that feels all the way right, and she concluded the tribute with 2 words: for chance. However, the handling of these characters became a major point of contention following the cancellation, because Gen V introduced key plot elements, specifically the superhero killing virus, as well as Marie being powerful enough to take down Homelander. Fans logically assumed that Marie and the surviving cast would be integrated into the final season of The Boys in a substantial way. Instead, the Gen V characters were almost completely sidelined. Marie and Jordan made a fleeting appearance, relegated to a few brief cameos, rather than being given the prominent roles the audience had invested in over the course of the spin-off. Showrunner Eric Kripke commented on Sinclair's post, expressing hope that they might see her again and vaguely suggesting we can get some more VOD series going so that we can continue their story. From an industry perspective, suggesting the creation of yet another future spin-off rather than integrating the existing talent into the current flagship show highlights the unstable nature of franchise television. It leaves talented actors without stable roles, and demonstrates how quickly central characters can be dropped by a studio the moment their specific narrative utility is deemed complete. The studio successfully built a spin-off, used a diverse cast of young actors to drive engagement between seasons of their flagship show, sidelined those characters to a cameo, and responded by suggesting they might get another spin-off someday. It's a very clean illustration of how Amazon views its talent, and it connects directly to a broader pattern of inconsistency that runs through the entire show, including how the writers themselves apply their own moral standards, or more specifically, how they don't. And this brings us to a highly criticized aspect of The Boys: how the show handles the depiction of trauma and sexual assault differently depending on the character. During the first season, a central storyline involves Starlight's traumatic experience with the superhero The Deep. The show handled her trauma with clear gravity and seriousness. The writers use this storyline to show the reality of workplace coercion, the abuse of power, and the psychological damage that victims face. Starlight's arc was widely praised as a smart critique of corporate culture and the real-world casting couch. However, as the show progressed and began to lean more heavily on shock value, its approach to these sensitive topics changed. This revealed a noticeable double standard in how the series treats male victims compared to female ones. In Season 4, Episode 6, Dirty Business, Huey Campbell is sexually assaulted and tortured in a dungeon by Tech Knight and Ashley Barrett. Unlike Starlight's storyline, Huey's assault was not framed as a serious violation. Instead, the entire sequence was played for dark comedy. The camera work, the dialogue, and the pacing were all designed to make the audience laugh while a male character was being abused. And here's the thing that's becoming impossible to ignore. We are now looking at a very clear pattern. A show that mocks cinematic universe expansion has built 4 spin-offs. A show that criticizes studio cost-cutting has quietly had its budget slashed. A show that built its reputation on treating survivors with dignity used male assault as a comedic punchline. Every single one of these contradictions follows the same logic as the fictional executives The Boys spends every episode skewering. The principle is fine to preach, as long as it doesn't cost anything commercially. That is exactly what VOD does, and the show is doing it too. And then we have the pacing controversy, and this is where the dynamic becomes personal, because this is where everything changed. Kripke stopped making inconsistent creative decisions and started publicly dismissing the people pointing them out. When a TV show runs for several years, audiences naturally expect the story to move forward at a steady pace. If the pacing slows down or the plot stops progressing, viewers will share their feedback online, and usually a showrunner will either take that feedback constructively or calmly explain their creative process. However, the way Kripke handled fan criticism has created a noticeable divide between the creators and the viewers. As the later seasons aired, especially season 5, fans became vocal about the show's pacing. Many viewers argued that the core story of The Boys felt like it was originally meant to be told in 3 seasons, but was being stretched into 5 purely to keep the franchise running. They pointed out time time spent on character backstories that did not move the present-day plot forward. They criticized the changing dynamic of the main group, originally a dedicated superhero killing team who, in the newer episodes, rarely actually killed any major superheroes. Instead of definitive resolutions, major showdowns were constantly teased in the marketing but either delayed or never delivered on screen, and instead of directly addressing these structural critiques, Kripke took a defensive approach. He stated that the fans complaining about filler episodes were just watching the wrong show. He dismissed the audience's frustration regarding the lack of plot progression, asking, "Are you expecting a huge battle scene every episode?" His core argument was that The Boys is meant to be a deep character study rather than a standard action show, and that if viewers were not satisfied with the pacing, they simply didn't understand his artistic vision. TV critics quickly pointed out the flaw in this defense. Streaming platforms like Amazon Prime typically produce seasons of only 8 episodes. With such short runtimes, modern audiences expect a tight, focused plot. Fans noted that Kripke appeared to be relying on a writing structure he developed during his time running Supernatural in the CW, a network that required over 20 episodes per season. Because traditional network TV shows need to fill a kind of episode count, writers use a specific formula, roughly 2 or 3 slower, character-focused episodes followed by 1 main plot episode. And that formula worked in a 22-episode structure, but when applied to an 8-episode streaming format, it makes the pacing feel remarkably slow. The fans were not misunderstanding the show. They were recognizing a writing pattern that wasn't built for the format it was being used in. And when a showrunner publicly dismisses his own fanbase for simply wanting the narrative to move forward, it damages the relationship between the show and the people watching it. It also closes off the possibility of the structural issues ever being addressed, and it creates a very particular kind of credibility problem. The kind where the more you insist your critics are wrong, the more clearly you demonstrate that you've stopped listening. Which makes what we need to talk about next even more significant, because Kripke didn't just dismiss criticism, he also made a decision that directly contradicts one of the most clear moral statements that the show has ever made. This is the one I mentioned at the very start of the video, and it's the hardest one to explain away. We need to talk about the character Stormfront and the upcoming spin-off series Vought Rising. This situation shows a major contradiction between what the creators of the show have said in interviews and the content they have chosen to produce. During season 2 of The Boys, the writers introduced a new superhero named Stormfront, played by actress Aya Cash. At first, she was presented as a modern, relatable hero who used social media to connect with her fanbase. However, the show quickly revealed her true identity. Stormfront was a character who used to be called Liberty, and she was a literal Nazi from the 1940s who had survived for decades without aging. The show used her character to make a specific and deliberate point. The writers wanted to show how old, hateful ideologies like white supremacy and fascism can easily be rebranded for the modern internet age. They showed how these ideas can be used to manipulate young audiences online. At the time of season 2, Kripke was very clear about his intentions in the press. He stated that he never wanted the audience to sympathize with Stormfront. She was not meant to be a misunderstood anti-hero with a sad backstory. She was designed to be the ultimate representation of hatred and bigotry. The writers wanted her to be an obvious villain that the audience was meant to detest, and they made sure her story ended with her being defeated. And then Amazon and Kripke announced Vought Rising. This new show is set in the 1950s and will explore the early days of the Vought Corporation. The 2 main actors leading it are Jensen Ackles, returning as Soldier Boy, and Aya Cash, returning to play Stormfront. And this casting decision directly contradicts the original message of the show. For years, the creators gave interviews about the importance of not giving a platform to hate speech and not humanizing Nazi characters. But now, they're giving the exact character a starring role in her own heavily promoted TV series. And say what you want about her character, she could be portrayed as an antagonist, but the fact of the matter is that by greenlighting the spin-off, her story becomes that much more convoluted and justifiable. The structural reality of this decision matters. When you place a character at the center of a television series, the way the audience views them naturally changes. Because she is now a main character in a prequel, the story will follow her perspective. The writers will have to give her personal goals, challenges, and daily struggles to make the show watchable across multiple episodes. And by doing this, the structure of the show forces the audience to engage with her journey. In TV, viewers naturally build a connection with the characters they spend the most time watching. Even if that character does terrible things, framing them as a protagonist inherently creates a degree of audience sympathy. You can't write a main character without making them somewhat relatable. That is simply how the creative form works. Take a look at You, for example. In that show, Joel Goldberg is a terrible person who murders women because he can't get what he wants. But even then, a large portion of the You audience ended up sympathizing with him, even saying that they found him attractive and wanted that in their own life. And relating this back to Stormfront, it completely undermines the anti-fascist messaging that the main show worked hard to establish in season 2, and it shows a clear shift in priorities. Amazon and the showrunners are choosing to set aside their original moral messaging because they recognize that Aya Cash and Jensen Ackles are popular actors who drove high ratings during their respective seasons. They took one of the most clearly defined villains in their fictional universe and turned her into a franchise lead because they know the characters are popular enough to generate viewership and subscription revenue. It's a decision based entirely on expanding the business, rather than maintaining the storytelling principles they previously set for themselves. And this connects to a broader problem with how Amazon manages the brand identity of The Boys, because it's not just this one decision. The Boys is a show that is openly political in its messaging. The writers frequently use the story to critique right-wing politics, heavy military involvement, and extreme nationalism. That positioning is a deliberate commercial choice. It's a significant part of why the show resonates with its core audience. But when a television series works very hard to present a specific political and moral viewpoint as central to its identity, identity, the audience will hold the people making it to the same standard. That is an entirely predictable consequence of that brand strategy. And when those expectations collide with reality, whether it's the budget cuts, the spin-off decisions, the treatment of the Gen V cast, or the decision to hand a Nazi her own show, the credibility gap becomes very visible very quickly. And this, I would argue, is where the franchise fully loses its right to call itself a satire, because a satire needs to hold a consistent position. The Boys built its entire reputation on the argument that corporate interests corrupt artistic integrity, and then the people making The Boys let corporate interests corrupt their artistic integrity. The show didn't just start resembling Vought. In this specific decision, it became Vought. But of all the contradictions we have covered today, none of them are as direct or as uncomfortable as what happened to one of the show's lead actresses. Because while The Boys spent years telling a story about the exploitation and dehumanization of women by powerful institutions, one of its own lead actresses was experiencing that exact thing in real time. The Boys is a series that has frequently criticized how women are treated in media. It spends significant time pointing out the flaws of internet culture and the behavior of powerful men who use their position to diminish and control women. The writers created characters like Homelander and the Deep to be clear villains, cautionary figures, not role models. And yet, a very vocal group of viewers seem to have completely missed the point. Those same fans took that behavior and directed it at Erin Moriarty, the actress who plays Starlight. To understand why this is so grim and ironic, it helps to think about what Starlight's storyline is actually about. Her arc is massively the story of a young woman trying to survive in a corporate environment that only cares about her physical appearance and how she can be marketed to the public. The show highlights how damaging this is for her mental health and her sense of self. And ironically, over the past few years, Erin Moriarty has faced the exact same treatment from real people on the internet. Across social media platforms, a large number of fans began to heavily focus on her physical appearance, creating countless posts and videos picking apart how she looked from season to season, analyzing her face and body rather than her performance or her character's story. They reduced her to a physical object to be judged and criticized online. Eventually, the negative comments reached a point where Moriarty felt like she had to speak out. She went to her Instagram account and shared an article written by a fan titled, "I Stand with Starlight: The Betrayal of Erin Moriarty by the Boys fans." Along with the article, she wrote a very honest caption explaining how the experience made her feel. She told her followers, "I do feel silenced. I do feel dehumanized. I do feel paralyzed." She reminded everyone that she had put blood, sweat, and tears into this role, and that she had essentially grown up playing this character. She pointed out the sad irony at the center of this whole situation. The fans were treating her in real life exactly how the corrupt villainous characters treat Starlight on the TV show. She asked the internet for some basic human kindness and empathy. She also stated that she forgives the people writing these things, but made it clear their words had massive and real impact on her mental health. And after she made this public statement, main cast did step in to support her. Anthony Starr, the actor who plays Homelander, the exact villain that many of these toxic fans look up to, broke character to offer his full support, writing, "Your work on the show is and always has been stellar, and who you are beautiful inside and out. Keep shining." Jack Quaid, who plays Huey Campbell, told Moriarty to leave the trolls to us. "We got your back." Even Eric Kripke posted a DM to the fans leaving negative reviews, stating that their behavior was unacceptable and that if they couldn't treat cast members with basic respect, they should stop watching the show entirely. And the fact that the cast did this is important. It's good that they did, but it's also a very clear illustration of the bigger problem. The writers of The Boys created a show to warn people about the dangers of judging women based on their looks and the toxicity of internet culture. Then the actress starring in the show became the target of a coordinated campaign of the exact same toxic behavior in real life. And that, ultimately, is the story of The Boys in a miniature, a show that identified real problems, articulated them clearly, and then found itself unable or unwilling to be immune to them. So is The Boys still a satire, or has it become the thing it makes fun of? I think that's a question every fan has to answer for themselves, because the truth is, The Boys told us who Vought was from the very first episode. It just took us a few years for the show to tell us who Amazon is.